Good morning, Wache. Bonjour. Je suis Charlie Angus, député de Timmins Bay James. I'm here this morning with Gil McGowan, head of the Alberta Federation of Labour, Gavin McGarrigle, director of Unifor for Western Canada, and my colleagues Heather McPherson and Blake Desjardins. As part of the supply agreement with the federal Liberal government, New Democrats have laid out a series of priorities in this session of Parliament. As you know, one of those deliverables is a national dental care plan, and that legislation is now working its way through the House of Commons. But another top priority for us is implementing a credible plan for the so-called just transition. The Liberals have missed every single climate target they have made, and we have made it clear to them that the government must step up their game and deliver a plan that does not leave workers and their families behind. This is a top priority for our party, and we are determined to push this government to get action. We have been very public in what we are asking for. We need to see a very clear vision statement from this Prime Minister that he understands the urgency of the moment and that he is willing to put the resources in place to make this happen. We have seen bold language and action from the Biden administration, who is committed to transforming the American economy, quote, based on good paying union jobs. And yet from this Prime Minister, we've only seen aspirational talk. And like the Biden plan, we're calling for a serious investment in clean energy that will kickstart development and attract investment. This government has given billions in subsidy to the oil industry, and they're using those profits to automate their operations, and they're laying off workers. And yet we've seen no similar financial commitments that will diversify the energy economy and work on the huge potential we see, particularly in Western Canada. And this funding, also a priority for us, the funding must be delivered through a credible, transparent agency with clear targets and deliverables. To be clear, New Democrats are talking about much more than some labor adjustment programs. This government must work on an industrial job strategy that will represent a generational transformation. And to succeed, this plan must leverage the skills and the innovation that exists among the workers in Western Canada. Calgary Economic Development and Global Edmonton have calculated that such investment will generate $61 billion in opportunities and 170,000 jobs in Alberta alone. And yet you'll never hear this kind of talk from Premier Daniel Smith or the Conservative MPs from Alberta and Saskatchewan. They would rather throw the energy workers of the West under the bus just so that they can spite Ottawa for ideological purposes. They are not here in Ottawa promoting the huge opportunities that we see in a clean energy economy. The Conservatives have filibustered committee work on the just transition and have blocked questions that should have been asked to Labour and Indigenous groups who have a right to be heard. And this is why it is so extraordinary what is happening today. The Labour movement in Western Canada have stepped into this void. They have issued a statement calling for clear talks with this Liberal government to ensure that a credible jobs transformation is put in place. New Democrats are proud to be working with the major industrial unions in the West, Alberta Federation of Labour, Unifor, steelworkers, IBEW, boilermakers, operating engineers, on taking the lead with them to push this government to finally deliver and transform the Canadian economy. Les néo-démocrates ont conclu un accord avec les libéraux et nous avons identifié les principales priorités de ce Parlement. Nous sommes déterminés à pousser les libéraux à mettre en place une transition juste pour développer une économie de l'énergie propre. C'est clair, les conservateurs de l'Alberta et de la Saskatchewan ont laissé tomber les travailleurs de l'énergie et leurs familles. Les conservateurs refusent d'abandonner les politiques d'idéologie face à la crise climatique. Ils ignorent les opportunités incroyables de diversifier l'économie énergétique. Les néo-démocrates vont travailler avec les syndicats et les travailleurs de l'énergie en Alberta et dans l'Ouest. Les travailleurs comprennent les nécessités d'élaborer un plan crédible. L'NPD va pousser le gouvernement lors de nos négociations à soutenir les travailleurs de l'Ouest canadien dans la transition vers une économie énergétique durable. I will now turn it over to the Alberta Federation of Labour.
Thanks very much, Charlie. I'm here today on behalf of the 170,000 Alberta workers who I represent to raise an alarm. The biggest threat to the Alberta economy and to jobs for Alberta workers is the unfolding and rapidly accelerating global energy transition. We can either pivot our economy and prosper or do nothing and be left behind. The second biggest threat to the Alberta economy is Alberta politicians. People like our new Premier Danielle Smith, who deny the transition is even happening. You can't prepare for change when your head is buried in the sand. That's why I'm here in Ottawa seeking the help of the federal government. We don't want anyone's pity, and we certainly don't want the glorified unemployment offices that some federal bureaucrats seem inclined to give us. Instead, what we want is an ambitious, well-funded industrial policy that will help us pivot the Alberta economy both within the oil and gas sector itself and beyond, so that Albertans can continue to have the jobs and prosperity that they've enjoyed in the past in a world that's changing fast. We at the Alberta Federation of Labour released a report last week that we think can act as a guide in this journey. We're bringing that report to Ottawa today. It's entitled Skate to Where the Puck is Going, an industrial blueprint for job creation and prosperity in Alberta, and it's built on the wisdom of two Alberta icons. The first is hockey legend Wayne Gretzky, who famously said that the secret to success in life, as in hockey, is to skate to where the puck is going, not to where it has been, hence the title of our report. When it comes to the energy economy, most Albertans know where the puck is going. It's going towards a future where there will be less demand for fossil fuels. Just look at the facts. The cost of renewables are plummeting, giving fossil fuels a viable competitor for the first time ever. All of the big automakers are switching to electric, which has huge implications for the future of oil demand. Global investors are getting leery about putting their money into projects that may become stranded assets and are instead piling into investments in low-carbon alternatives and infrastructure. Even oil companies aren't investing in themselves. Instead, they're using their record profits to fund dividends for investors and stock buybacks to boost their stock prices. And when they do invest, it is often in automation, which eliminates jobs instead of creating them. At the same time, heat waves, wildfires, and destructive storms are providing constant real-world reminders about the need for action on climate change, and governments are signing ambitious international agreements to accelerate emission reductions. To top things off, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has only strengthened the determination of nations around the world to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels. What all of this means is that the global energy transformation is real. We can't change these trends by funding war rooms or voting for someone who tells us what we want to hear. All we can do, all we must do, is skate to where the puck is going. Wow, I've lost my place. Where did I go? There we go. Yes. That leads me to my second Alberta icon who provided inspiration for our report, Peter Lougheed, the iconic politician who most Albertans agree was our best premier ever. In the 1970s, Lougheed saw that Alberta was running out of conventional oil and gas, and he understood that we needed a new engine for our economy. His solution was to pivot the Alberta economy towards two new industries, petrochemicals and perhaps most importantly, the oil sands. We know how that strategy turned out, and it turned out to be a huge success. But at that time, corporate investors, including big oil companies, were not interested. The status quo had been too good to them for too long, and they saw no reason to change. Comfort with the status quo is why incumbents rarely lead change, and it's why they often are left behind when it comes. Lougheed understood this. He also understood that no country or region has successfully retooled its economy by simply letting the market decide. The United States after the Great Depression, Western Europe after the Second World War, Japan and South Korea in the 60s and 70s, even Canada's post-war industrialization. All of these places became economic powerhouses because of public vision, public policy, and public intervention, not in spite of it. Policy wonks call this industrial policy. Renowned economist Mariana Mazzucato calls it the entrepreneurial state. Lougheed called it activist government, and it's the approach he took to create the prosperity we've enjoyed in Alberta for the past 4 decades. More specifically, he used a mix of incentives, regulation, public-private partnerships, and outright public ownership to pivot the Alberta economy. And that's what we need today. In the face of the unfolding global energy transition, we need a Lougheed-style industrial policy updated for the 21st century that will put us on a new path to prosperity in a changing world. The need for a Lougheed-style industrial policy for Canada and Alberta was made even more urgent by the passage this summer by the U.S. Congress of the Inflation Reduction Act. Make no mistake, the IRA is industrial policy designed to pivot the American economy. Electrification, hydrogen, critical minerals, transit, building retrofits, manufacturing to support electric vehicles, it's all there. The Americans are our biggest trading partner, and our economies are deeply integrated. We can pivot with them and reap the benefits, or we can refuse to follow their lead and be left behind and left out. Given the high stakes and the accelerating pace of change, we need our governments, both at the provincial and federal levels, to relearn the lessons of Lougheed and follow the path set by the American IRA. I'll conclude this morning by saying that Albertans need someone to claim the mantle of Lougheed and update it for our times. Will that someone be a provincial politician or a federal politician? Honestly, for the sake of Alberta workers, we hope that it will be both. Then together, we can turn the threats of the global energy transition into opportunities for both Alberta and for Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Workers know that if we are not at the table, we're simply on the menu. And we've had enough of being tokenized and getting a pat on the head instead of being at the table, not just once, but ongoing, not just in a advisory capacity, but in a policy-making capacity. We know our jobs. We know our industries. We know that we need good jobs that have pensions, good jobs that have benefits, good jobs that have unions. And nobody is talking about that. Everybody is talking about the need to transition as if work is simply disappearing. We're not just talking about a transition across sectors. We're talking about a transition within jobs. And quite frankly, minimalist training programs and certificate options and job banks are not the way to go. What we need is to find out what's the plan. What's the plan for real jobs? What's the plan for strong communities? What's the plan for a worker who has 20 years in the oil and gas industry to transition, to move, to increase their work, to make sure that as we're going into the future, that workers are not left behind? We're tired of it, and we're here asking our politicians to make action now. We want to move toward industrial policy. We want to be planning the changes, and we need to be at the table. We've seen from too many politicians about the need to attack the federal government or point fingers instead of actually sitting down around the table and getting to those real solutions. We know, for instance, when our members were locked out in Saskatchewan at a co-op refinery, the Conservative government there under Scott Moe was nowhere to be seen while our members froze. We know that when we were picketing oil and gas workers in Alberta, Jason Kenney and the UCP, again, were nowhere to be seen. And we're asking all the Conservative politicians out there, why do you say that you want to talk about working people, but you won't meet with us? You won't talk about unions. You want to, in fact, weaken workers' ability to join unions instead of moving forward. We're in a race with many other countries around the world. We need to stop the finger pointing. We need to get workers and their unions at the heart of our industrial policy, at the heart of our economic transformation, and not just talk about dollars for compensation, minuscule dollars for compensation, which need to be much, much bigger for anyone affected. We need to talk about maximum dollars for transformation, transforming our economy and making sure we're at the center of it. Thank you.
We will take any questions.
And we'll start with questions in the room. Nous allons commencer avec les questions de la salle. If you're on Zoom and you wish to ask a question, please use the raise hand function. Si vous êtes sur Zoom et vous désirez poser une question, utilisez la fonction lever la main. David?
Hi, good morning. David Thurton from CBC. I guess I always ask this question whenever, Mr. Angus, you're here and you're talking about just transition. How much are you looking for? How much do you need to see?
Well, it's a very important question, and it's something I hope that we can sit down with the Liberals in our negotiations and put a credible plan in place. You know, the United Kingdom, under a Conservative government that is as backwards as one can imagine, has put 2% of GDP on the table. Biden, we know, put $30 billion into the electricity grid. So what we've seen from the government right now are a series of programs spread out over a whole series of departments, and that's not going to cut it. The government has told us how much money they put into clean energy. We haven't been able to find that. This is why we need we need to have this set up in a fund that is transparent and that people can see. Biden has set up a green jobs bank, and that's something that's certainly attracted investment. We have not seen a similar commitment here. So this is something we will be negotiating and hearing from our partners. I know certainly our Labour allies have a lot of opinions on this as well.
Okay. When I speak with Minister Wilkinson, and I bring to him the concerns that you're raising, he says that you're at the table with him and you're very much familiar where the government is at and will be when it comes to delivering its promised plan for just transition. So if you're in the room with the Liberals, why are you here every so often, you know, putting the gears to them? If you know very well when the plan is going to come out, what the plan is going to be, and you're helping them make the plan.
I think what's really important is that what we have not heard from the government is a message that is very clear to workers and their families, that this government gets it. And as I said, we've been very public. The first thing we've asked for is this vision statement. We are still pushing to hear this. And it's important to do this in public. This is not about, you know, putting the gears to government. This is about sending a message to energy workers, to regions that are affected, and also to the international investment community that Canada will be a leader in the clean energy economy. We haven't seen any of that language yet. So negotiations are ongoing, and I'm not at liberty to discuss what's being said in those meetings. But in terms of the ask that the New Democrats have put on the table, it's been very, very clear. The government knows this. I think what is really, really important here is that for the first time, we see the voice of organized labor from Western Canada stepping up and saying the government needs to improve on their game. I'll turn it over to Gil McGowan on this.
Well, I want to give credit where credit is due. And there's absolutely no doubt that this federal government has distinguished itself in its willingness to sit down with alternative voices from Western Canada. We've heard over and over from the federal Conservatives and their provincial cousins in governments in Alberta and Ontario that Albertans see the federal government as a threat. But and they pretend to speak on behalf of all Albertans and all Western Canadians. But the reality is that there is an appetite among Western Canadians to develop strategies to mitigate the threats posed by the unfolding global energy transition, and also to seize the opportunities. So, for example, we, on behalf of workers in Alberta, released what we describe as a jobs blueprint for a changing economy in Alberta just last week in Calgary. And I think it's significant that our report, released on behalf of Alberta workers, is actually very similar in its broad strokes to reports released by Alberta business groups, including, as Charlie mentioned, Calgary Economic Development and the Business Council of Alberta. The fact that we're all singing from a similar song sheet suggests to me that A, we're on to something, and that B, there's another Alberta and another Western Canada that's not being given an opportunity to be heard. And so I want to give the federal government, and especially Ministers Wilkinson and O'Regan, full credit for sitting down and meeting with us. We've been having constructive conversations, but it's a process, and it's a process that unfolds behind closed doors in our meetings that they've been having with us and with the business community in Alberta. But it's also a process that has to take place in public spaces like this one. So, because Alberta workers need to hear that that their leaders at both the federal and provincial level are making plans for a future that's going to look different than their past. So instead of just doing it all behind closed doors, we've decided to be very public with our asks and our suggestions. That's why we produced the report and released it in Calgary last week. That's why we're very happy to be working with Charlie and other members of the NDP caucus. This is how democracy works. It's not something that's decided over one meeting or between a handful of politicians. It unfolds with a lot of participation from various stakeholders over time, and so I see what's happening today as a very constructive part of that conversation.
No.
And there are no questions online, so this concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin la conférence de presse. Merci.
We're finished? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good job, Gil.